Hi everyone, Professor King here. Another day, another horribly pixelated video from my own laptop. In this video, we'll be discussing writing and reading in academic contexts, which come from chapters 1 and 2 of the Norton Field Guide to Writing. So I recommend that you have a pen, notebook, your laptop notebook, and anything that you have at your disposal to take notes, and probably some access to the internet too, particularly the Fullerton College website, so that you can generate ideas about some of the questions that will be asked in this video. One helpful tool is whether I go too fast or too slow, or if you want to take notes, a great idea is always to pause as the video is going on, so that if you do need to, if I ask you to reflect on something, or if you need to pause to write down notes as I'm sharing them, please make sure that you do that. This information isn't necessarily like something that you'll be quizzed on later, but it's the basics, the fundamentals, the sort of givens, I'll say, of academic writing and academic discourse. So make sure that you are paying attention, that you're following along, that you're asking the questions to yourself that I ask you in this video, so that you know what's going to work best for you as a writer and a reader in a college academic setting. I'm going to take it to a share screen in just a moment, but remember, as always, to pause where needed, as I mentioned before, and also if any questions, comments, or concerns arise, please feel free to contact me via Zoom, office hours, my Canvas email, or Canvas messaging, or my on-campus email. All right, so that being said, I'll take it to a share screen and I'll take it to our PowerPoint. All right. So this is chapters 1 and 2, writing and reading in academic contexts. We'll start with reading in academic context, since a lot of times in college, you're expected to have read either an in-class source or a piece of research before you write on it. So let's talk about how we read academically. What does it mean to read academically? How do we start on that process? Well, the very first thing you should do is you should read strategically. And the first way of doing that is previewing the text. And what do we mean by previewing the text? Well, what I mean is, let's say you have a textbook or an article or something of that nature. It's not a bad idea to look over its length, see how long it's going to be, how long it takes to read. Some websites will even have sort of like the reading length time period on there, which can be helpful, but a lot of those websites aren't very academic, right? They're more like Googled websites. Also look for things like, I'll talk about this more in slides to come, but looking for things like subheadings, maybe finding out a little bit about the writer who wrote the piece, looking for image clues, anything that you can have to give you an idea of the gist, the overall gist of the assignment, right? Without having to dive right in, because you want to get a feel for what the writing is going to entail before you get to it. And why do you do that? Well, think about it. Let's say you're like me when I was in college and you wait until the last minute to do the reading. If that's the case, right, and the reading is 5 to 10 pages long, that's not horrible. That's doable. However, if you wait till the last minute and the piece of writing is 50, 100 pages long, and you've kind of run down the clock, so to speak, then you're going to have a problem. So I would say to preview the reading, even maybe at a time that you're not necessarily going to read it right then and there, but just to get an idea of, throughout the week or whenever you do set aside time to read it, that you kind of know how long it's going to take, and you know how many breaks you need to take, the kind of environment you need to put yourself in, whether that's like a quiet white noise environment or, an environment where you can have sort of intermittent distractions to give you those breaks. Whatever works best for you is really the answer. And know that you're going to have to adjust your reading speed to different texts. Sorry, the text got cut off there. reading stuff that you Google is clearly usually very easy, because most stuff that's on the internet that's on ad revenue generated websites is meant to be quick and easy, right? It's meant to be easily digestible. The stuff that's academic, that's challenging, that's rigorous, it's supposed to be difficult. And the reason is if it were easy, right, it wouldn't really get into the complex nature of thought, of reality, of all of the things that we as college members of the college community really care about. This really substantive stuff that matters is going to be more challenging in so many arenas of life. So keep that in mind, and also keep in mind time management. Like I said, I was the student who waited until the last minute to read things, and that a lot of times didn't always work out well for me if I ran out of time. And so one thing that I find really helpful is, like a little calendar like this that we all have on our phones or on our laptops. Create a calendar like this, not just things like work or appointments, but things like due dates for assignments, and set those reminders so that when an assignment is upcoming. Color coding, whether it's something that's work related, personal life related, school related, is kind of a good way to help you visually organize your time. And then also the most important parts of your schedule are the gaps, right? Are the places where you have free time. And the last thing I'm going to tell you to do is to block out all of your free time. We need free time. We need time to decompress, to absorb what the day has given us, to wind down from all of it, especially right now in this day and age, right? So give yourself also pockets of that free time so that you can do that. But make sure in that schedule, you're also giving yourself blocks of time for things like studying or writing or revising or things like that. All right. When we're looking at a piece of writing, and we all know, I'm guessing we all know what this is right here. It's an academic essay, right? And how can we tell that? Well, we can tell that because we're looking at organizational cues, right? We see a heading. I know you don't even have to worry about the word say, because you see the heading here, you see the title, you see the sort of half-page introduction. So we go, oh, that's like the essays that I've had to write either in high school or college or wherever I've had to write academically, right? So in an essay, you know that in an introductory paragraph, you're looking for a thesis statement. You're looking for an argument right off the bat. However, not all works of writing are essays. And so the problem that a lot of us fall into when we're reading something like an article from a magazine or a work of fiction is that we've fallen into that knee-jerk response of paragraph 1, thesis, when not everything is a college level essay, right? If anyone ever read like the Harry Potter books, the Harry Potter books are not college essays, right? They're works of fiction. And you're not going to get the theme or the message or the intended purpose just in the first paragraph. You have to read hundreds of pages of Harry Potter to get the sort of underlying argument of what's going on. And yes, there are arguments in Harry Potter, even though it's a fantasy story, right? So keep in mind, right, that thesis statement in the first paragraph way of thinking is only really for the college level essay. And everything else, the thesis is probably going to show up someplace later on, someplace further than just the first paragraph. So what do we look for then? If it's not a college level essay and the thesis isn't in the first paragraph, what do we look for? Well, look for things like transitions, right? How does a person transition from one idea to the next? Do they have a subheading where they're kind of telling you what they're going to talk about? Again, do they have images that kind of help guide you topically or thematically through the piece? One thing that's helpful is maybe read the first couple, again, when we're doing the pre-reading, read the first couple of paragraphs and the last couple of paragraphs and see if there's any sort of guesses you can make about what's in between those. That's going to help you. And then once you start reading, right, once we've sort of surveyed the reading, thought about what type of text it is, whether it's a poem or a college level essay or an article or a short story or whatever the case may be, think about as you're reading it, and a text can even be something like a film, a documentary, a television series, right? These are all texts. These are all things that people create through writing initially to send a message or to create an overall impression for an audience. And that audience is the people reading or watching. And so now we're there. We are there. We're at the start of that movie. We're at the beginning of that article. We're at the start of that short story. We're going to start reading. So what do we do while we're reading? Well, we have to think about our initial response to the text. And yes, we have to make sure we have an intellectual response. In other words, we have to make sure that we understand what the writer is saying. What does that mean? Well, that means looking up words we're unfamiliar with as we go. That means annotating and taking notes, which is something I'll talk about in a moment. That means challenging ourselves, not just skipping over when it's difficult, because that's not challenging ourselves. Really grappling with anyone who does like martial arts, mixed martial arts, there's a term called grappling, right? Which is basically rolling around on the floor in a very uncomfortable way with another person. And so I use that term grappling a lot because that's what we're doing with a text, right? We're getting in there. Not all of it feels great, but we're trying to conquer this thing, right? We're trying to have control over this text in the same way that an MMA fighter is trying to have control over the other MMA fighter they're fighting against. So that's the intellectual part, right? Making sure we get it, which takes time, takes work, takes effort, isn't always easy, especially at the college level. But we also have to think about our emotional response to the text. And so once you start to have a glimmer of understanding of what the text is saying, you're looking at the finer details. And sometimes those finer details can really bring up some emotions in us. Emotions that say things like, oh yeah, I totally agree with that. That's a brilliant idea. I never thought of things that way. Emotions that say, oh, that reminds me of this really painful or this really joyful event in my own life. Or emotions that say, you know what, this is total BS and I'm not buying any of it, right? And a whole other gamut of emotions that we can run anytime we read. That emotional response is equally, if not more so, important than the intellectual response to the text. And so what you have to do is now thinking about both of those emotional and intellectual responses working together. You have to then ask yourself, once you have that response as you're reading or once you're done reading, why do I have that response? What about my personal experience, my beliefs, my education level, my knowledge of this text, my knowledge of who wrote this text, the implications of this text being true or being agreeable? You know, why do I feel the way I do? That's incredibly important because that is going to be the basis of your thesis, or at least a thesis you could have about the text. All right. So, you know, I know this, I put this picture in here because I know, again, like sometimes when we're grappling with text, we want to just give up and go, forget it, you know, because some of them are difficult. Not all of these texts we grapple with are going to be the easiest thing in the world. So how do we deal with difficult texts? Well, we look for those familiar landmarks. And I would say look for them after you've done at least one initial reading, because you will have, again, sort of understood the layout of the text itself. You'll remember kind of, oh yeah, in this section, this person talks about this, and over here they talk about this, and then this is why they come to this conclusion, right? Also, read more than once. You know, this is a 4-unit course, which means you're supposed to be spending 12 hours a week on this course, right? The 4 would be the in-class online stuff that you do, and then the extra 8 are all the stuff you're supposed to do on your own. Reading, writing, et cetera, et cetera. So if you got 12 hours to burn, you can definitely have enough time to read the texts that are presented to you more than once, which you should do, because no one's an expert on a text if they just read it once. I can tell you people I know who have PhDs in, Melville studies of Herman Melville and Moby Dick and studies of James Baldwin and all these writers. They didn't become experts because they read Sonny's Blues or Moby Dick once. They read it over and over and over and looked for different things and read multiple texts of that person and really dove in, right? So read more than once and make sure as you're reading, you're monitoring your understanding. One thing that I do that's really helpful is I put a box around unfamiliar words as I'm reading them. Then I wait till I get to like the end of that paragraph. So I at least have a general idea of what the overall topic of that paragraph is. And then I go back to those words that are boxed that I don't know, define them either, online or in a dictionary. And then I go back and reread the sentence so that I can understand it even better. I also leave notes in the margins, right? Whether it's I understand, I agree, I disagree, what the heck does this mean? What's this person talking about? What's this historical event that they're referencing that I don't really know a lot about? And then I go look it up, right? And then I reread in context. And be persistent, stay challenged. We're in college for a reason. And it's because we have continued to challenge ourselves throughout the years. If you showed up and I said, hey, write me a paragraph long book report, and I just kept having you do that, you would eventually get bored because that's something we did in 5th, 6th grade. That's not something we're doing as, freshmen or beyond in college. So think of the ways you've challenged yourself up until this point and know that that's going to continue, that you're still going to have those moments of grappling, of frustration, of lack of clarity, but that if you work at it and you do the things that I'm telling you to the best of your ability, right? You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be an expert yet, but if you're persistent, know that it'll pay off. All right, so talking about how we read a text, we can't read a text without documenting our reaction, because we're eventually going to have to write an essay that documents our reaction, right, in an essay form. So the best way to prepare for that is by annotating when we're reading, so that we've got the notes to refer back to when we get to the essay writing. So what is annotating? Well, annotating is taking notes as you read. And those notes should contain something along the lines of your initial reaction, that emotional aspect, plus the summarizing, the intellectual aspect. You should also be thinking about the purpose of writing, right? Why is this person telling me what they're telling me? And think about who the author is. Think about what the message is, what the context is, all these things, right? And for visual learners, clearly an easy go-to is highlighting, underlining, putting little emojis on the side of the text, right? Whether that's a smiley face, a frowny face, a thumbs down, a star, an exclamation point, a question mark. Just making sure that when you go back to review that, because you got to write an essay for it and you got to pull out some quotes or whatever the case may be, you got to show that you've read, that you have those at your disposal, that you have that documentation already there. Make sure you know how the text works, right? What it says and what it does. So another form of annotation we can do is outlining the text once we've read all of it, and really look at the structure of the writing, okay? And think about how each paragraph functions, what it does, what its purpose is, etc. Again, in a typical college essay, you're gonna have the intro paragraph with a thesis, then you're gonna have body paragraphs with claims, evidence, and analysis. We'll talk more about that in a moment. And you know that you're gonna keep doing that till you get to some sort of conclusion. But what if you're reading, let's say, John Steinbeck? Well, John Steinbeck is a fiction writer in from sort of the mid 20th century. And he writes a lot about the California experience, California coast, traveling, things of that nature. So what does John Steinbeck typically do? Well, I actually have read a lot of John Steinbeck, and I can tell you that one thing I've noticed about his text, and you can even check this out if you want. In the first paragraph of most of his novels, whether it's The Pearl, whether it's Of Mice and Men, Grapes of Wrath, Cannery Row, he does the same thing. In his first body paragraph, he always describes a setting in great detail. He's a creative writer, right? He's not an argument writer as much as he is a creative writer. So he's writing in a different type of genre. So he sets up this setting and he talks about, you know, these serene brooks, but there's some potential of doom coming up, you know, and he really sets up the mood and the place of where we're going to be. And then he goes into the characters, right? So he lets us know where we're at first before he tells us about the people who are there. And so I've asked myself, right? Why does John Steinbeck do that? Why does he set up these sort of pastoral, or whatever you want to call them, landscapes? And the best response I can give is exactly that, right? He's telling us where the story's taken place. He's kind of setting the mood for what's going on. And he's showing us that he's showing us his writing chops, right? He's showing us he can create an image for us right off the bat. And he puts us in that world. And so when I'm talking about outlining what the text is, what it does, and what effect that has, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Again, it's going to be different for us when we're writing our essays. We're not going to start with some major description of a setting, right? We are going to give some background information and then dive right into our argument. And the reason why is because we want to get our readers' attention right away with that really solid killer argument. All right, so now I have some questions for you. So as I ask these questions, you may want to kind of pause and then reflect from your own experience on what you think the best answer is. And you may say, well, heck, you're the professor. I'm the person on day one of the English class, right? But I also recognize that each and every one of us has a massive toolbox of skills that we are bringing to the writing classroom, right? A lot of you in your discussion boards and, you know, students, when I've taught in person, they always talk about all of the things they think they're bad at in terms of their writing. And they never talk about the massive toolbox they have and all of the skills that they've acquired over the past 12 or 15 or 20 or however many years they've been learning writing, any kind of writing. And so I believe that we shouldn't downplay those skills, that we should harness those skills, because the more we realize those strengths, one, the less sort of scary and stressful the English class is. But two, the more we realize, oh yeah, I've done this a million times before. I just got to do it a few more times in, you know, old Kinger's class, and then I got to do it a few more times throughout college. So keep in mind that when I'm asking these questions, I acknowledge the strengths that you already have. And yes, each one of you has a different set of strengths in different combinations and permutations, but you all have writing strengths. And you need to harness those so that you can become the best writers you possibly can be. So the first question I have for you to think about using your toolbox of writing strength is, how do we provide evidence or show that we've considered a subject or a text thoughtfully and thoroughly? What can we do to show we've considered the text that we've just read thoughtfully and thoroughly? And here's a hint. I've already mentioned a few of them earlier in this video. But there are other ones that you may think of on your own. So take a moment, pause, and jot down some ideas of how you show you've considered a text thoughtfully and thoroughly in academic writing. All right, so the next one is talking about why our topic matters. And this is what I call the so what. And the way that we unlock the so what is by doing what I call unlocking the inner 5-year-old, okay? And I'll give you an example of what I mean, because I know some of you in here have younger siblings or younger cousins or children of your own, and they are a great example of the so what, of really an audience wanting to know why the purpose behind something is what it is, okay? So think about if you have a kid or a sibling or a cousin or even yourself. Think about like a 5-year-old. And when you tell a 5-year-old that they can't do something or they can't have something, maybe it's candy, maybe it's riding on a motorcycle, whatever. What is the first thing that that 5-year-old says? Exactly. They say, why, right? Why can't I do it? And then you, as the adult or the older person in that scenario, you give them a reason. You know, oh, you can't ride on that motorcycle because you'll hurt yourself. What's the next thing the 5-year-old does? Well, why? Why would I hurt myself? I don't think I'd hurt myself. Why do you think I'd hurt myself? And then you say, well, you're small and you don't have full motor coordination and capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So it's best that you don't get on that bike. Well, what if it works out for me and I'm not too small and I can get on the bike anyway? And we keep going down this road, right? And they keep asking those why or what if questions until you lose your mind and go, just no, okay, right? And then shut up or whatever. But you have to ask yourself. You got to ask yourself, why is that 5-year-old driving me insane with these questions? And the answer is, it's because their world is about this big, right? Our world is this big. A 5-year-old's world is this big. Their frame of reference is like nothing. And they want to understand the nature of the thing, right? 5-year-old doesn't understand the mechanics of a motorcycle or how too much sugar can lead to health problems down the road, right? They're 5 years old. But the reason why they're asking all those why and what if questions is to get a more thorough understanding of that topic, is to not just see it as something one-dimensional, but really understand the nature of how it functions and why it works and why in relation to them, it exists in the way that it does, either as something that's forbidden or something that they can only have sometimes or whatever, right? And so now we have to apply that same logic to our writing. When you write your essay, guess who the 5-year-old is? It's anyone reading your essay. And so your mind and all of the arguments and opinions and thoughts that exist within your mind are blank, are hidden from me. I don't know you, right? And so how do you show me that what you're saying is valid? And how do you get me to understand the purpose of what you're saying? Well, just in the same way that you anticipated those 5-year-olds' questions and you kept answering those potential whys and what ifs, you do that in your writing. You say, why am I telling this person that this argument is important? Because of this. Well, okay, if that's the case, we're not done. Then why is that important? Well, because of this, right? Well, okay, but what if this happens? Well, then that. And you have to explicitly put that on the page to show that you are thinking critically about your subject matter, right? You have to ask those whys before I do. Because if you don't answer them for me in an essay, guess what's going to happen? I'm not going to be able to understand your point or your purpose and, right, mark down or whatever, right? So keep that in mind. We also have to think about responding to what others have said, right? Which means research. And don't worry, we are on day one, tip of the iceberg precipice of research. We don't need to know all the research today. Sorry if you can hear my 5-year-old neighbors outside. Speaking of 5-year-olds, they're all like screaming like wild animals. So how do we thoughtfully consider research? And how do we build on other people's research and prior knowledge? Again, use your toolbox and answer that question. We also need a clear and appropriately qualified thesis. Well, what does that mean? To qualify something means to try to acknowledge its complexity by saying, okay, here's one premise, here's another premise, here's this, right? And while we acknowledge all these things, here's why I'm still arguing what I'm arguing, right? Acknowledge that your subject is complicated. So again, using your toolbox, what you've learned in the many, many years you've spent in writing and or English and or language classes, according to you, how do we remain objective and avoid being too intense, too polemical, or too biased? Think about it. We also need, in academic writing, good reasons supported by evidence. So in an academic essay, what kinds of evidence can we use to support our claims? And the only hint I'm going to give you here that I will repeat ad nauseum throughout this course is avoid Google at all costs. I don't know if you guys saw, like, you know, Kanye's Donda drop, or if you've ever been to the Met Gala, or if you've ever seen like a runway show. Using Google for research is like showing up to any of those things in a t-shirt you got at Target. Like, yeah, it covers your body, but it's not at the level of the event's expectations, right? That's what Google is in the academic context. It's like showing up to the Met Gala in a Target t-shirt. Again, yeah, it kind of does the job, but you've totally missed the point, right? And you're totally out of your league. So avoid Google, but again, use your toolbox and think of kinds of evidence we can use in a paper to support our claims. We also need to acknowledge and respect multiple perspectives. That goes along with, you know, acknowledging that that our own content, our own topic, our own argument is complicated. So acknowledging that the world is complicated is integral. It's necessary. The world is not a TikTok video. It's not 140 characters. It's not, excuse me, a 20-second Instagram soundbite, right? The world requires much more explanation than that. And so given all of the soundbite sort of culture that we're exposed to on a daily basis, how do we stay open-minded? How do you? We also need a confident, authoritative stance. And that requires us to be direct. And so if we need to be direct, we can't be wordy. And I know what all of you in your heads are thinking right now. Oh man, that's how I get to that 4, 5, 6 page length, right? By throwing a bunch of extra words in there. Yeah, I know. I've been doing this for like, you know, let's say I've been going on 15 years, 20 if you count my education as well. Yeah, I know when people are using words just to fill up space. Like, I've been doing this long enough, right? So how do we avoid wordiness and just have that direct message in our academic writing? And what's the difference between being confident and being extra when we're writing academically? Again, take a moment, think about it. We also need to document our sources because, again, if we use Instagram as an example, right? Every day, all day long, people are telling us all kinds of arguments on Instagram. This is good, this isn't, this person's canceled, this person's uncanceled, this is that is that, right? But at the end of the day, you go, okay, well, where'd you get your information from? And if they can't give you reliable information from a clear-cut source, then you go, all right, well, I'm not canceling Doja Cat today, or I am canceling Doja Cat today, you know, given the evidence you've provided me. So in academic writing, we do the same thing. It's just called a works cited, where we research sources from the library website, and we have a page at the end of our essay, after our essay, that says, here's all the sources and here's all their information, so that when someone else wants to find them, they've got all the information they need to look them up. And make sure you double check the works cited yourself, because those works cited generators, a lot of times they make minor mistakes that, again, someone who's been doing this for 20 years can tell. Also, pay careful attention to correctness. Revise and ask questions often. But what I would say is this. What I would say is write to get the words on the page first, and then revise afterward. Because if you revise as you go, it slows you down a lot. But, type it out. And then once you have it all typed out, go back and revise your own work. And don't worry, we're going to be workshopping in this course so that you'll be able to look at other people's work and then apply those same principles to your own. And then finally, I think this is finally, ask yourself, what resources do we as writers have available on campus and beyond, right? A good place to start with answering that question is fullcall.edu, and going to the sort of different student support and writing center and tutoring center outlets. We have pages that we have off of that main Fullerton College website, but then think about what we can do beyond the campus. That'll be great resources for us as writers. And you may want to pause and reflect and answer that question yourself. All right, so now I'll take it off the share screen. I hope, maybe I'll keep that on so you can actually see my face. I hope this was all really helpful. Thank you for watching and listening. Again, if any questions, comments, or concerns arise, please feel free to email me, Canvas message me, or visit my Zoom office hours. I hope you read the most recent message and announcements where I said, try to avoid Pronto, because Pronto can be a not fun place, just as any text or chat thread can be. So yeah, I'm not doing the Pronto too much from this point on. So email, message on Canvas, or Zoom are the best ways of getting a hold of me. All right, well, thank you all so much. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and weekend, and whatever other day you're celebrating. So yeah, see y'all in cyberspace. Bye.